Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to my very favorite kind of indie book review, and that's the kind where I loved it, and I just get to talk about how much I loved it for like 15-20 minutes. So today we are discussing Plague Arcanist by Shami Stovall. This was my most anticipated book of the summer because the end of the third one gutted me so hard, and I knew this one was going to be big. Now, of course, this is the fourth book in the Frith Chronicles, meaning I'm going to be talking a lot of spoilers. So if you have not read this series at all, I will have the first review as well as the second two down below. I will also have a reading vlog in which I talk about this book in a non-spoilery way. So if you still want to watch me gush about it and get anxious and then get really happy, you can watch that as well. Good. Let's jump right in. So this book takes place, it begins literally like, I think minutes, like he's just getting on the Sun Chaser from the end of the third, having just been infected with the arcane plague. And I loved that ending so much. It felt like the proper next step because you'd spent 3 books building up this plague as a big thing. It was only a matter of time before one of the main characters, one of the main cast, was infected with it. And the entire premise of this, of Volk trying to beat the plague, was anxiety inducing at times. And I was also really sad that he left the Frith Guild for virtually this entire book. And I wasn't too heartbroken about it as a whole, only because I love a good reunion. And so I'm like, all right, if I get a teary reunion with hugs and everything at the end of this, I'm okay with him leaving them. And at first I'll admit I wasn't too thrilled with his traveling partners of Fane, Adelgis, and the doppelganger Arcanist Karna because, well, Adelgis, you were still kind of figuring out who he was moving forward because, you know, the first 2 books he was kind of the background, and then in the third book he was out sick for a large portion of it. So this is the first one where you see him in his full moonbeam weirdness proper, and then Fane, you really only started seeing him as a full-out character instead of a villain's lackey halfway through the third book. So they were 2 of the most underdeveloped characters, although I guess now Hexa is probably the more underdeveloped character, so she gets the next one, Shami. But anyway, but as I went, I realized that those were the 2 characters that actually had the most to repay Volk, because you had Fane, who, again, was a villain's lackey, just one of Callisto's crew, and everyone basically wanted Volk to end his life, and Volk decided no. Not only did he spare him, he actually showed him mercy and helped the pirate redeem himself. And then you have Adelgis, who was kind of overlooked by everyone else, and then when he has this big illness in the third book, it was Volk that was going, you know, balls to the wall to heal him. So these are the 2 that have the most to repay Volk, specifically in that he basically spared both of their lives and saved both of their lives. So once I started realizing that, it felt like a much more cohesive trio. Low-key, for some reason, I do ship Adelgis and Fane, and I don't know that either of them, like, swing that way. As far as I'm aware, currently, I only know of 2 queer characters over the course of the story. Of course, you have Zelfrey, and you get a lot more insight into his life in this book through dream memories, and I loved it. I loved getting to see more of his time with pirates and how he got to where he was, because I am a big fan of the, like, grizzled, basically an alcoholic mentor that gets bullied back into mentoring by a plucky protagonist. It's my jam. I love it. So getting to focus more on that washed-up mentor getting back in the game was so nice. But also there's another character, and I'm not going to reveal it in case it was meant to be revealed, a female character that mentions casually having lain with another woman before. But I don't know if this world counts as queer norm. You never see any, like, governing body have an opinion on it, so I can't say for sure. And Adele just does talk about the kind of girl he would be attracted to, but fingers crossed, if Tumblr can do it, I can do it. Regardless, I didn't mind the crew of the Sun Chaser. There's kind of this moment where Karna is trying to, like, convince Volk to stick around, and I was like, no, he belongs with the Frith Guild. He belongs with his found family. Like, you cannot take him. But there is some surprise meetups in the book, and I'm not going to ruin any of that, but I will say you get to learn a lot more about Volk's family, which I hadn't even really thought a lot about, because you know that he's from these two parents that like were written off as criminals, and that's part of the reason that he works so hard to be noble. But it didn't bother me too much not knowing more. I did enjoy it. It just, for me, it wasn't like the burning question I had. The burning question, of course, here was, how is the plague going to affect Volk, and how were they going to cure it? Now, I was a couple different kinds of ways about that. At first, I was really annoyed that the plague seemed so slow moving, and it's meant to be. In an Arcanist, it takes months before you get to the point of no return, whereas in an Eldrin, it takes days. And also, the story prior to this gave such a little information about the plague in its early days that you didn't really know the symptoms. Like most of the Arcanists and the Eldrins that you see over the course of the story are late stage plague victims that have already gone mad, and you don't really see the beginning stages. So I didn't really have a method of being like, how far along in the plague is he, to know how much time is running out, as opposed to just going, oh, they have 6 months. Like I wanted to see more time. And then as I was thinking about it, I realized part of the problem was that the character that was infected, because Volk is basically characterized by his nobility, by his constant, ceaseless determination to be the very most noble, upstanding hero he can be, to the point where it basically makes him super naive. You began with that. So him slipping doesn't really look like slipping, because, you know, he mentions at one part that, oh, you know, this very noble thing I did, I don't think I would have done that now if I was to come across that person now. And it was like, yeah, but nobody else would have either. So it's almost like the beginning stages of the plague for him were him just having regular, non-obsessively noble morality. So it kind of made the plague itself feel less tense, because he was starting from such a high place. Now, there were a few moments in the heat of battle that you saw him starting to lose things and get really intense, and that was the moments where I was like, ugh. Or at one point he had a nightmare about slaughtering people, and you were like, Volk does not have dreams about slaughtering people. Like, so the second half of the book, you really started to see the plague take off. And admittedly, I think I would have preferred to have that a little bit earlier, because there were moments where there were some side quests and things that I could almost forget that, like, yeah, we're still looking for a cure for the plague from Adelgis's father. But the side quest involving a maze and these scarab beetle-like Eldrin called the Capera, I believe, was really intriguing. It was one of the many things they were looking at to try and cure the plague. I will say there was this moment where it was like, they're in the maze, they're finding the Capera, and they're like, oh, we're gonna do it, but it's like halfway through the book, so you're like, of course that's not the answer. Like, that's not gonna be the answer. What I did like about this book, and it's definitely the kind of thing that you have to be the right reader for it, is that this book is very lore heavy. There's not as many action scenes as usual. Now, that's not to say there's none. There's still fights with plague-ridden Eldrin. There's still pirate battles. There's still the big ending at the end, which is a little bit different, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But this was a lot more emphasis on, like, technicalities and how the magic works and where the soul stands come from. And I loved where the soul stands come from, because low-key, those felt a little too overpowered when they were first introduced in the third book. And it's like, hey, there's these sands that can just basically heal your body and soul. And I'm like, wow, that feels kind of Deus Ex Machina like. And then you find out their origins and how finite a source and the insane steps you have to take to get them. And I was like, okay, we've nerfed them now. Like, it doesn't feel like as OP technicality as it did before. But you again find more about Zelfrey and the Frith Guild as a whole. And the one thing I also appreciated about Zelfrey's memories was you see more about Gregory Ruma, because in the first book you don't get a lot of time with him. So really you only have Volk's like story knowledge to go off of to tell you how good a person Gregory Ruma was. And of course, as you know, he ended up being a villain that entire time. Now, it wasn't his fault. He was plague-ridden, but there's this kind of idea of, I wanted to see who he was beforehand. And so you see him through Zelfrey's memories, and you can see the hero that Ruma was before all of this, and that almost made his death in the first book sadder, but like posthumously, because you get to see the kind of person he was and understand just how big a deal it was that this giant hero turned to the dark side through the plague. And you also get to see some of the origins of the plague. Like, again, it's very lore heavy. A lot of focus on Zelfrey's memories and the world building and the mechanics. There's a lot more focus on the mechanics of true form Arcanists, which does become important later on. And I loved how it became important. But the ending in itself felt different than a lot of other Shami Stovall endings. Now, this is the 5th book that I've read of Shami Stovall, and in every book in this series and her sci-fi series, still waiting on the sequel, has very big bombastic endings, and this one was darker than any other one in the series. And I get that, like, the other ones were like basically dark because we're still, you know, yes, it was dark like the 3rd one because the 3rd one was, you know, an assassination, but this one, it was, how do I explain this? His goal was not just to defeat the big Eldrin. Of course, there was a big Eldrin fight. There has to be. I don't think it counts as a Frith Chronicles book if it doesn't end with a big Eldrin fight. But the big Eldrin wasn't the source. Like, defeating the big Eldrin wasn't going to do the thing that Volk needed to do at the end. It just was an obstacle in his way to the thing he needed to do. And yes, I'm trying to speak as vaguely as possible here, but there's so much emphasis on the darkness and the big bad things coming up, and Volk being less certain of his own survival than ever before. And in general, he's a much more despondent character over the course of this story than in any other one. At the beginning, he's so despondent, and he actually considers whether or not it would be the right thing to do to take his own life because of the plague. And wouldn't that save Luther? But Luther is like, hey, I already lost one Arcanist, I'm not doing that again. And I can't say whether it's overt enough to trigger anything, so I'm going to put a content warning just in case for suicide ideation. It's not an overt theme, and it's not a theme the book focuses on a lot, but it is there. And the ending had that same, not that he wanted to kill himself, but it was the most, I don't think I'm getting out of this, that he had ever felt before. But the very ending healed me. And I'm not going to get into the details, but it healed me. And I debate on whether or not to say this because, like, it might low-key be spoilers, but if you're like me and you require knowing that this is going to happen, like for me, if you separate the character from his found family, I require knowing, or at least I'm going to assume to get through the book, that there is going to be a great reunion at the end. And yes, there's a big reunion at the end with hugs and smiling and grinning and confessions. And so yes, highly suggest for that alone. I think the last 30 pages I was literally reading with a grin on my face. It was such a turnaround from the 3rd book, where it's like the 3rd book, it began all happy and tournaments and yay, and then it ended gloom and doom, and in this one it begins like gloom and doom and despondent, and then it ends happy and grinning. So it's a complete turnaround. The other thing that I appreciated was the stakes got giantly bigger in this one. You learn more about the Second Ascension in this one. They are the group that was responsible for the assassination of the Queen in the last book, and it was the most scary scene. I'm not going to get into it very deeply, but it was the worst thing because Volk was literally in a position where he couldn't move, like, even his head. Like, he could not move his own head. He's sitting there frozen as, like, things are happening around him. And it was one of the scariest scenes, just knowing that there was nothing he could do if something went wrong. Got real dark. Whew. But I love it because these stakes are so gigantically big that this series is going to last a while. It mentioned in the 3rd book, they talked about the second coming of all these big creatures, and you get the feeling that more of them are going to be coming pretty regularly. More of them are going to be coming, and there's 13 of them. So This is gonna be a long series at this point, I think, but you also find out more about the leader of the Second Ascension and just how big a threat he is. And I swear, he makes Callisto look like nothing. And Callisto used to really scare me, but then you also find out some more about his background, and oh my gosh, a lot of reveals. So many reveals in this book, but moving forward, there are gigantic world-shattering implications, but I don't even mind, because that means that we're gonna have a nice, gigantic series ahead of us with a lot of nice, big, thick, meaty books. I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't mind having a Frith Chronicles book that was under 500 pages, but you know, I still love it. I'm really excited for the next one, which, judging, well, you can see by the title, it's called World Serpent Arcanist, where they have to find someone to bond with the World Serpent, aka one of the really, really big Eldrin that's come back, so like, I'm super excited. I'm super jazzed about it. I love this series so much. I love Shami Stovall so much. This was my most anticipated read of the summer, and it 100% lived up to it. So I think it goes without saying that I gave it 5 stars, like every other Shami Stovall book I have ever read. And if you couldn't tell from the way that I'm now speaking really, really fast, I'm just getting really excited. So I think I'm gonna end it there. If you are an indie author and you would like a book review like this one, please send me an email. I will have my email down in the description below. Please be made aware, I am currently like soft close to review requests, meaning I am more likely to say no than usual. I will also have my review policy down there. Please give that a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.